Employment is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, having money is nice. Money affords us such luxuries as a roof over our head and food in our bellies. And who doesn't love a good roofed head or fooded belly? On the other hand, employment can often be a hellish nightmare from which there is no escape. But at the end of the day, we need money, so we endure this hellish nightmare. Office Space is a movie about a space, designated as an office. More acutely, it's a movie about the people that spend their lives in this space. Primarily, Peter Gibbons, the protagonist. Peter is an individual in his late 20s, potentially his early 30s, listlessly floating through the banality of his mundane existence. According to him, every day is worse than the last. Therefore, every new day is the worst day of his life. The primary driver of this discontentment is ostensibly Peter's source of employment, Initech. The actual sector of industry in which Initech resides is largely unclear, other than the fact that it's some sort of tech company. But that's largely irrelevant. Initech serves as a sort of catch-all for white-collar jobs, with the movie insinuating that every such job is similar to this one, and every such job is equally vile. Peter hates his job, but is too pusillanimous to do anything about it. As a result, he endures all the slights that his corporate overlords would foist upon him, be these slights as banal as improper filing of whatever the hell TPS reports are, or as substantial as working on the weekend. All of this changes with a botched attempt at hypnotism, and as a result, Peter finds himself no longer shackled to such paltry notions as income and wealth. As such, he adopts a less than enthusiastic attitude towards his current employment circumstances. One would assume that such a dereliction of duty would be cause for termination, but alas, this is not the case. The protagonist fails upwards. Instead of being let go for his lack of initiative, he is promoted. Surely this would be seen as a positive thing. It is not, because while Peter is being promoted, his friends are being terminated. What follows after this is largely narrative in nature and eschews much of the social commentary that was being laid out earlier in the movie. This video is primarily about the social commentary of the film, so for the sake of completion, I'm just going to breeze over the rest of the synopsis. Peter tells his friends that they are getting fired. They are less than thrilled and enact a scheme to take revenge on Initech by way of what the characters assume to be petty larceny. The petty larceny turns out to be less than petty, and this causes the protagonist and his friends much emotional distress as they believe they are going to, quote, federal pound me in the ass prison. Peter realizes that he messed up by roping his friends into his crime and writes a confession that is delivered to his boss. The aforementioned boss never receives this confession because Initech literally goes up in flames via arson committed by a disgruntled employee whose only purpose for existence is to be comedic relief. None of these literal white-collar criminals face ramifications for their actions, and everyone lives happily ever after, with the two supporting characters finding new IT jobs and Peter finding a new career in construction. There's also a subplot with Peter's love interest, Jennifer Aniston, that in my opinion only exists because some sort of romantic plot is necessary for all movies of this type made in this time. Credit where credit is due, Jennifer Aniston is a babe, so we can probably just call it a wash on this superfluous narrative appendage. Before I get into a more robust commentary on what I believe this movie is trying to say about society on a broader scale, I would like to make a brief disclaimer. This movie is very funny. If you ignore all the potentially misguided underlying messaging and simply want to catch some laughs, this movie will certainly satisfy that urge. The movie Office Space would have us believe that the banality of white-collar existence is anathema to a fulfilled life. Personally, I cannot confirm or deny such a claim, as I have never worked a white-collar job. I am sure that there are some less than ideal circumstances in that career path, but I would make the case that the suboptimal circumstances of white-collar employment pale in comparison to the truly nightmarish ones found in other industries. Office Space makes the case that white-collar jobs suck. Sure, probably a little bit, but I would make the case that yuppies don't know how good they have it. To be completely forthright, my primary source of employment for most of my working life has been in the service industry. More specifically, delivering pizza. If you are a white-collar worker watching this, I assure you I have seen horrors beyond your comprehension. Furthermore, the small insights we are granted into the service industry through the eyes of Jennifer Aniston seem as if they were written by someone who has never experienced them firsthand. From my experience, the service industry is so much worse than anything that was exemplified by the fictional restaurant tchotchkes. I've been attacked by dogs after bottoming out my car several times on a quarter-mile unpaved driveway, all for a $3 tip. So forgive me if I do not sympathize with the woes of improper TPS reports. I've had to wash bus tubs full of rancid chicken because management couldn't be bothered to keep up with even the most mild of inventory practices and allowed that meat to expire. So forgive me if I don't sympathize with the Jan printer. I've been expected to work every single holiday other than Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving for more than a decade. So forgive me if I don't sympathize with someone being asked to work on a Saturday. Furthermore, the end of the movie leaves us with Peter working in construction. I've never worked in such an industry, so I cannot speak to it firsthand, but from what I've heard, it's backbreaking work for very little pay, something that I would not assume to be preferable to sitting in an air-conditioned office building. All of this isn't to say that there are no downsides to office work. I'm sure there are, but Office Space depicts this line of work as if it were hell on earth, and I can assure you, there are greater hells than this. But one thing represented in the film that rings true to my service industry sensibilities is the incompetence of management. I feel like managerial incompetence is something that most workers can break bread over, regardless of industry. The antagonist of Office Space, Bill Lumbergh, is so relatable because he doesn't represent any issues solely applicable to any particular industry, but more that he exemplifies broad characteristics embodied by many middle managers. Lumbergh is condescending, entitled, undeservedly confident, and so on. But most importantly, he is powerful. Not like really powerful, mind you, just marginally more powerful than those he is managing. Even still, he uses his meager amount of authority, not for the betterment of the company, or to bolster the morale of his workforce, or anything that one would typically associate with a managerial position. Instead, he abuses his power in a petty attempt to assert his false dominance over those working beneath him. He is a small man, pretending to be of greater stature than he is. Suffice to say, Bill Lumbergh is a shitty boss, and anyone who's been in the workforce long enough can relate to this concept. While I obviously do not necessarily agree with the specific slights on display in the movie Office Space, I do very much agree with the broader sentiment being expressed. Work sucks. Regardless of industry, I feel as if this is an almost universally relatable notion. But what is to be done about such a thing? To put it simply, let your money do the talking. If you have a bad experience at any given establishment, that could be written off as incompetence by any given employee, and may not speak to broader issues within the company. But if there is a pattern of bad experiences, that speaks to issues significantly higher up on the corporate food chain. That speaks to Bill Lumbergh style management. Don't support Lumberghs. Let these vile cretins reap the rewards of their dastardly doings and find their deserved place amidst the ruins of others of their ilk. Let bad businesses fail. Let them fail by taking your money elsewhere, even if it represents a mild to moderate inconvenience to you at any given moment. From my experience delivering pizzas, I've seen time and time again, customers receive very poor service due to corporate policies, yet those customers return again and again. I can't speak anecdotally to any other industries, but I would imagine that this pattern persists in more than just pizza. Don't support companies that treat their employees poorly. Don't support companies that cut corners and deliver an inferior product. Don't support the workplace culture that Office Space was calling out 25 years ago. A workplace culture that is still wholly present today. This is not some pie-in-the-sky, unachievable goal. This is something about which something can be done. This is something about which something should be done. If we sit idly by and do nothing, the Lumberghs of the world win. If we sit idly by, people everywhere will have a perpetual case of the Mondays.